Well, I tried really hard not to dislike this guy, and I just couldn't do it.
Yeah. No, there's points where something happens and I say something in public and then I'm like, oh, I think Tom's mad at me. And it might be that way. I might feel that way for like a week. And then I see him and it's like, no, okay, we just move on.
Well, I
Move
mean,
on.
look, I think I respect people who are doing this for the benefit of the community and not for some personal hidden agenda. And even though I disagree with Addison on a lot of things, I know he's sincere and in trying to do what's right for the community. And I'm the same way. And so that's where we're coming from.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, while Tom may have properties, I don't think that he's doing this because he has properties or for personal financial gain. I would
Definitely
disregard those accusations. Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the reasons we're here is that the other incumbents running for office are not responding to media requests a lot of times. They won't sit down and things like this. And I think that there's been a pattern of doing things behind closed doors and not allowing for public discussion. So a lot of the struggles we've had, with me being a one minority, don't even have a second to emotion a lot of the time, is just being able to have the discussion play out. So that's one big piece. The actual policy, it is the direction that our city develops in. And like, do we allow suburban sprawl to take place? Do we just give developers what they want with these expansions of land? And then how we deal with homelessness is definitely the biggest things. But I can say that like nobody wants people to camp in the parks, and there's not a political future available for Chico where that is legal or okay, or we don't do what we within what the resources we have, we don't limit that and eliminate that.
Well, so it's very simple. So the last 4 years, what you've seen is the city has aggressively addressed homelessness, built a shelter, 177 unit pallet shelter, biggest in the state, as far as I know. We have reconstituted our police force. So we finally, at one point, we only had a half-time traffic officer in a town of 109,000 people. We have aggressively been addressing the crumbling roads. In the next 2 fiscal years, this year and next year, we'll spend $151 million or let contracts $151 million in road construction. 4 years ago, we were spending something like $5 million on road construction. And there's other things. We've increased the maintenance budget for the park. We've built 1,400 units of affordable housing. And so if you think those are good things and you want us, the city, to keep going in that direction, you should vote for my team. If you want to go back to homeless people camped everywhere and crumbling infrastructure, you should vote for his team.
But there's two reasons that we actually have the money to do the road projects he's talking about. One of it is the sales tax, which was voted on by the people. The money was not there, and now it is there, and that was something that Tom and I both endorsed. The other is that we get these massive state government grants, right? And this is like the infill infrastructure grant that pays for Bruce Road, was because Marion Park required affordable housing. They put that on the application because it was a well-planned development. It was new urbanist. It was approved under a liberal council. That's the reason the money came in. And if we're going to get the resources from the state and federal governments, we need to have our policies aligned with their goals, which is largely to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase affordable housing. And that's what we're promising.
Well, so I think it's important to listen to what people do, to pay attention to what people do, not what they say. So the liberal councils tried to get a sales tax passed for years, and they could never get it done. Well, we got it done, and that whole initiative was led. I mean, my wife wrote the campaign material, so we made that happen. They couldn't get it done. As far as the grants, so yeah, all that money was available for grants, but you have to go get the grants, right? And so the city has been incredibly aggressive and clever about getting grant money. And part of it is because of the campfire, and part of it is because of affordable housing. But it doesn't just happen automatically. You've got to go make it happen. And so it's not only the council, but we have new city manager as of 2.5 or 3 years ago who's transformed the place. I mean, the city manager's second level department heads are just rock stars. I mean, they're really good at the city, and they're making a lot of good things happen. Want me to go?
Yeah, you go.
Yeah, so Addison is a member of a group called Smart Growth Advocates. And what Smart Growth wants to have happen is to increase the density around the city core. So if you think of the city as a series of concentric rings centered on the downtown, the more people tend to live in close, the less commuting there is. They can walk, they can ride a bike, there's less traffic, it's better for the environment, it's better for them, and it's better for the community, so you're not isolated in this steel box, right? And so, and the nucleus of that is downtown. So there's a project called Complete Streets. He wants it to be all about bikes. 93% of the people who come to town come in a car. So we have to find the right balance. But the making it more pedestrian friendly, more bike friendly, improving the bike infrastructure, connecting the northwest, east, south. South, east, west, north, south bike trails is really important. I think where we disagree, so I'm completely in favor of that. Where we disagree is just because there's a piece of land close to the center of the city doesn't mean it's economically viable to develop it, given the current values and rents. And over time, as rent levels come up, then it becomes more viable. But infill is inherently more expensive to develop than greenfield development. I've done 5 infill projects, and I really like the idea of infill, and I'm an enthusiast. But the difference between us is I don't want to mandate it. People have to decide where they want to live, and the economics need to work. Otherwise, the projects can't happen.
So on the downtown, making downtown more walkable and stuff, that's the area where we've really come together. I say we didn't manage to get the follow through on the street plan, but at least we're in that direction, right? It was punted off, but we will. I think we will get there, and I think that Tom and I will work together to make sure that happens well. As far as the infill versus greenfield suburban sprawl kind of deal, it's not about mandating there be infill, but as the government, we have control over the resources to come through us, the federal and the state grants, like all this for affordable housing that came from the federal government, right? And the city should be proactive in making sure that infrastructure funds and in all the funds that we get go into areas that support our community plans and this kind of development of a denser core city that leads to a better quality of life for people, that's financially more sustainable for the city and has all these kind of benefits. I think the city should be proactive in trying to direct the development to be to align with our community goals. I don't think that it's something that we should just accept what's offered to us by developers because they own a gigantic piece of land on the end of town. We should make sure that things do correspond with the needs of the people who are here. And the government should be active in that. And he would say I'm a socialist for that. And I would say, well, yeah, I don't think that PG&E should own our power. I don't think that Cal Water should own our water. And I think that we should make moves to put the people in control of more of the fundamentals of the economy.
So can I add something? So if you look at our general plan, it aligns completely with the goals of the smart growth people. I mean, it's very much encouraging concentration around the core. And if you look at the sort of footprint of the city, where the city limits are compared to, say, 30 years ago, even though we've doubled the population, it hasn't changed much. So we have done a really good job of that. But infill isn't the only kind of development. 60% of the people in this community still want 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, so they want a house with a yard and a garage, right? And they don't want to live in an apartment. And it's easy to say we shouldn't mandate it, but when you don't allow those developments, that's effectively what you're doing. Well, the agreement, I decided to run for council when I was with my wife and we were on vacation in Southern California, and I read the settlement agreement and I said to her, I got to run for council because it's such a mess. And it's just very cumbersome. So it's a 17-day notice period. So we have to notice people 17 days. Then once we clear an area, they can come back, right? And so the whole thing, where we need to get to is where the rest of the United States is and Western Europe, which is if you're homeless, you can't camp in public spaces. The police come and say, okay, you have to go to a shelter, but you can't stay here. It's not allowed to squat on public property. So 2.5 months ago, I'll try to make this more brief. 2.5 months ago, the Supreme Court overturned the Boise v. Martin decision, which is what the settlement agreement is based on. That decision made the settlement agreement moot. So when we say we got this in front of a judge, the judge has no choice but to set it aside because the ruling was very clear and unequivocal. So there's some property rights issues. But we already have mechanisms to deal with that. So I'm sure there'll be some stipulations like that are part of what the judge says. But fundamentally, we need the ability to say to people, once an area has been cleared, particularly, you can't camp in Bidwell Park, you can't camp in the plaza, because it destroys it for the rest of the community. There's been no decision made to close the alternate site. It is something that has been discussed. I think we need the alternate site. I'm not in favor of closing the alternate site.
It's in the Rule 60 motion is that the judge will maintain like purview over the city of Chico, and we will promise to keep the pallet shelter open, but the alternate site only till the end of the year. It feels like
but it
hasn't
been. It hasn't been decided, and we're going to have a new council that gets seated on December 5th, and that'll probably be something that's on the agenda early on. But I think if we shut it down, then where do those people go? Yeah. Right.
The idea, it's like, oh, well, they're felons and criminals. It's like,
they are.
Well, right now, if you have felons and criminals in one place with dumpsters and a bathroom and services coming through, if you run them out of there, then you're going to have criminals and felons now scattered all over the place. It does not make the city a better place.
Well, so what California decided to do about 10 years ago, they said, gosh, in France, they only have about half as many people in prison as we have, and so we're going to let half the people out. And oh, by the way, it's discriminatory, right? Because we have more minorities proportionally in jail. And so guess what? Those people that were in jail, they're now camped scattered around here because they don't have, at least when they were in jail, they had medical care and 3 meals a day. Yep. And we were all better off when they were in jail.
Yeah, the funny thing about that is those 3 meals a day in the bed in jail is publicly funded, right? But once we start talking about having a managed shelter sites and you have some like dumpsters being publicly funded, now all of a sudden it's not the city's purview.
Well, we have a shelter. We have a shelter site. And by the way, I point out that our conservative council got that done, which is something else the liberals had talked about for decades, and nobody was able to get done.
Yeah. I mean, one, like, I'm no liberal, I would say, but we got the pallet shelter because we got sued in the settlement agreement, and the settlement agreement motivated you to run for council, but not to shut down the pallet shelter, I take it.
No, I'm in favor. The pallet shelter's been a great success because it's been managed properly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a big key in the operation of shelters. Do you have management or not? And the biggest issue with the alternate site has been the persistent lack of management, the refusal to work with service providers who have offered to provide management. The settlement agreement, so the delay on moving people out of parks, the way that people have been allowed to come back to places that have already been cleared out, is obviously untenable. So much so that we had this agreement on the table in June we could have signed that would have dramatically reduced the amount of time, right, that it would take to move people out of there. And then after Johnson versus Grants passed, and after the city said, hey, we're going to look to get out of the settlement agreement entirely, the plaintiffs, these unhoused individuals and their counsel, came back to us and they said, okay, as long as you maintain your shelter commitments, and they wanted us to have 95% occupancy of the pallet shelter, try to fill up those empty spaces rather than keeping them open, then you can clear out the whole city anywhere with just a 3-day notice, which is normal, 72 hours. That we should have taken that. It would have expedited the process of us being able to do that. We still could have applied to get out of the settlement agreement, but the city decided they had an interest in trying to make this settlement agreement appear unworkable. And to do that, they could not agree to any of these things. So all these painstaking negotiations we went through, we just threw them out the door in order to make a better case that this is unworkable, even though we're the ones making it so.
I think Addison has slipped into his alternative reality zone here. So
it's the closed door stuff.
Look, this law firm rope-a-doped us. You two young remember Muhammad Ali or Click? Yeah, okay. So he used to do this thing when because people paid a lot of money to go to these boxing matches, right? So instead of just knocking the guy down, he would sort of like play with him. And he called it rope-a-doping, right? Well, the Northern California Legal Service has been rope-a-doping the city for almost 2 years. So once the Supreme Court decision came down in Boise v. Martin, the whole thing was moot. The settlement agreement was moot, and the city said, why should we burn legal dollars, spend money on lawyers and time to string this thing out? We're just like, no. We want it to go away, and it will go away.
Well, I mean, that's exactly like my case, is that we didn't need to spend the legal dollars doing this Rule 60 motion to get out of the settlement agreement because we already were given an offer that addressed our major concerns. It just required us to commit to these shelter obligations. One of those, and one of the major ones that the council cited, this is cited in the city attorney's letter, for us not accepting that, was that they want us to keep an alternate site open. They wanted to make sure that everybody had somewhere to go in the city. So if we could have agreed to that, then we would be in a much better place.
There's no reason for us to agree to anything with them anymore. But let me give you, when you talk about the plaintiffs going back to the judge, right? So when he says the plaintiffs, you have envisioned these poor homeless people, in rags, and they're supplicating to the judge. Well, the reality is, when this thing got settled, the law firm, I think it was almost $700,000, and there were five plaintiffs. How much money do you think? How much money do you think they got? They got $3,000, and the other $650,000 went to the law firm. So, being in the business of protecting poor people as a lawyer is a very good business.
They're a nonprofit firm. Nobody is profiting off of this enterprise. It's to pay their costs. And honestly, the most tragic thing about this whole Warren v. Chico lawsuit is the fact that the only nonprofit legal provider in town for low-income tenants who are being taken advantage of by predatory landlords was taken away from all of that work in order to challenge the city of Chico because they were evicting 50-plus people in the rain with no shelter available at all. I mean, it was an egregious case that led to the court coming down on Chico this way. It was not because they had this really strong case, not because they were overly aggressive, not because the city was weak. It's because the city was doing absolutely insane things that I think neither Tom nor other people on the council right now would really justify. We've had one person on the council, the mayor, who says that this airport campground was a good idea. Other than that, everybody looks at that as lunacy. It's just the fact that we've gotten into the settlement agreement. We know that we could be in a better place now. That's
what the Supreme Court decided is that the city was right in the first place. And the judge and the Ninth Court was wrong. So the thing to keep in mind is that all the Supreme Court decision did is bring the Ninth Circuit in conformance with the other 11 district circuits, which have the same rule, which is that the city can enforce its quality of life laws. And its whole argument about criminalizing homelessness is complete nonsense. They're not a protected class. If you litter, I don't care if you're rich or poor, you should be cited for it, right? If I decide I want to go camp in Bidwell Park with my backpack and my sleeping bag, they should kick me out just like a homeless person.
They should, but there should be somewhere to go, and that's the difference between what the city was doing.
But we have somewhere to go, and those people either aren't refusing to go because they don't like the color of the pallet shelters, or they have to behave. They can't do drugs and be crazy and run around. Or they're sexual predators and they don't play well with other people. And so the people who run the pallet shelter say, we are not going to let you in here if you misbehave or you have a record of violence, right? You can't do that.
Because the pallet shelter is a low barrier shelter, and anybody who has experienced the place knows that people do drugs and run around in the pallet shelter.
Yeah, but as long as you behave, don't
reject the pallet shelter.
As long as you behave, it's okay. But if if those things cause your behavior to make you not be able to function in a group setting, then you can't be there. And then we'll let Gridley or Biggs worry about it. Addison wrote a 3-page missive that he distributed to the press about this. So you're a reporter, Mona. You're a reporter. So let's say you go out and a good one. And let's say you go out and investigate a story. And on one hand, you have 8 or 10 people, and the city manager, the city attorney, the public works director, the chief of police, who were in the room, right? First-hand knowledge, and they all have the same story, right? You got one story there. And then there's a guy who comes along, I'm not pointing any fingers, just somebody who comes along who wasn't in the room, has second-hand knowledge, and they have a different accounting. Who are you going to believe?
Well, that's why I brought receipts. Also, the public works director, the police chief have not been in the room for these things. This is closed session. There's a city council.
No. We're not talking about the closed session. We're talking about negotiation with the law firm. You're changing this up here. We're not talking about the closed session in city council. We're talking about negotiation with the law firm around the settlement agreement. That's what we're talking about.
Right, and I was describing the holdup as being not just from legal services in the room where our city attorney, the public works director might be involved, but in the room when it was
At this
us.
point, it doesn't matter because the agreement is moot and it will be set aside, and we'll move on.
You believe the judge is going to side with the city?
Well, if you read the Supreme Court decision, they can't do anything else. Are we going to be the only city in California or in the country that's governed by a settlement agreement? I mean, there are going to be aspects of it that remain, like the property management stuff. But as far as noticing agreements, and I mean, once an area has been cleared, we need to summarily be able to move people out. Period. But you can't have a town or civic life. The priority for of our city should be the quality of the civic life for the 99.75% of the people here who want to have a family, raise kids, have their kids ride the bike in the park, not the 0.25% homeless people.
Gosh, I agree. We should be able to enforce when we clear out an area and people have been assessed for shelter. We should be able to move in there and enforce there. And we were given that opportunity, and they shot it down. And it's the same thing as this whole issue with immigration and Donald Trump calling Republican senators in order to say, "Don't pass a border bill. I want to run on the border bill."
Point of order here. I think you're off topic.
For anything before you move on from homelessness, anything else you two would like to? Any closing remarks on the topic before you move on?
Actually, some conversation we've had recently, because we both do agree very much about the importance of downtown. We also agree that the people.
You want closing remarks on homelessness?
Yeah.
Not the whole.
Right. No, I'm not. Yeah. So talking about, and people camping in the plaza is a real issue for people coming downtown. People cite it as a reason they don't want to come downtown at times. But whenever I hear that, I hear people talk about somebody who's like harassing somebody for money. Somebody's assaulted somebody. And I think it's really important that we be able to distinguish the criminal offenses, harassment, and things where people should have a restraining order against them. They shouldn't be able to just hang out in these places when they're bothering people like that. And those are real criminal problems from people who just don't have a place to go and need to sleep somewhere. I think that if we try to group them all together, we're actually not going to be able to address that actual criminal element. We get in the mud with it, and then we don't know who's who, and we're just trying to rush everybody out of there, but they just move somewhere else, and it's going around in circles. We should be able to distinguish sleeping outside as a social service issue from harassment and assault, which are criminal issues.
Well, so it's not the city's responsibility to house every homeless person that wanders through town. But the key issue is whether you want the city to be focused primarily on the quality of civic life for the people who live here, and the welfare of the homeless people second, as opposed to prioritizing the welfare of homeless people, which has happened in cities like San Francisco, for example, or Oakland or Los Angeles, and at Sacramento. It's destroyed the downtown core in those cities. And so we have to be humane. These are human beings, but we also have to realize what we're dealing with. 79% of them have been convicted of felonies, right? They've been incarcerated. I have a 75-year-old friend. Wait a minute. I have a 75-year-old friend, 100-pound woman. She was down at the Co-op on 9th Street, it's at 8th Street, and went out to her car after getting something in the store, and there's a homeless guy standing in front of her driver's door. So I'm not going to let you in your car unless you give me money. So she gave money, and then he said, "No, I want more money." Right? So she's not really enthusiastic about coming downtown anymore. Now, Addison's right. You've got to distinguish those people from the people that are just misfortunate. But you know what? Whenever you have a presence of large numbers of vagrants, people don't want to go there because there's a sense of it being unsafe.
I'll go first. So yes and no. I don't know that it's the city expediting that process for them, but it's the fact that the city is electing to interpret their activities as this thing that requires this $14,000 application fee in months before a planning commission hearing, where they might tell you that you're responsible for like all the trash in the neighborhood and your volunteers have to go clean it up. That's absurd. The Safe Space provides a service for the city. We know that we don't want people sleeping outside. It's a big deal. It's a bad thing when we have people sleeping outside. And so having people go somewhere indoors during the winter is a good thing. And Safe Space is at capacity all season long when they're out there. So the city has the option to look at what they are. If they're doing an objective analysis, say like, okay, if you change your activities a little bit this way. We can make it just an office, not a big deal, and we can approve that. And if you want to develop something later, you go through this process, right? But the flip side also, and the weird thing about this is state law says that if you're a low barrier navigation center, like a shelter with access to connections to other services for permanent supportive housing, good things like the tourist shelter's doing now, you are allowed by right. So Safe Space is in this position where like they could try to like downscale activities. They're like, what if we provide no showers and laundry? If people are smellier, will you say that we're not doing this thing that requires this conditional use permit? And then, or they can try to increase their activities and then be allowed by right. And the city being in that situation and being in the situation where we have an interest in reducing unsheltered homelessness in our community should work with Safe Space to make something work without the $14,000 and without the delay in the season, more importantly.
My turn?
Yes, go for it.
So Safe Space is a very good thing. I mean, they help out. These are human beings. However, last year there was a big fire drill around Safe Space. You know, they were at the 7-Eleven, and then they were at the Hands, and then they were actually in the parking lot of this church over here. And there was a special city council meeting, and so you would think that the people that ran Safe Space would say, well, we don't want that to happen again. So we're going to get engaged with the city early on and figure out what has to happen in what order. They seem to forget that it gets cold every year about this time, right? They didn't realize last year, and then this year it seemed like a big surprise, and there's a big fire drill about finding a space. Well, the problem with the space that they're proposing is there are businesses and neighbors there who are extremely unhappy that is going there because it trashes the neighborhood. So what they're being asked to do is what the Jesus Center has done, what the Torah Shelter has done, what a Catalyst has done, which is to go through a permitting process. There has to be a neighborhood meeting. That's a critical part of it, right? So what we can't do is put something like this next to somebody's business or home without people saying, you know, it's okay or it's not okay. And based on what I'm hearing is we may have a new record at a city council meeting for people that are upset and going to come to the meeting. So I'm all in favor of what Safe Space is doing, but they have to find a place to provide the service that doesn't impact the surrounding neighborhood, and they need to get management that understands that there are 4 seasons every year, and despite global warming, it gets cold every winter, right? Not as cold as it used to, maybe, but cold enough that they need to give people shelter, and they need to be thinking about this in April instead of October. So it's not the city's job to find them a place to go. But they did, especially in the context of, they did the same thing last year, and you would think that the adaptive learning process would be active in somebody in that organization, and they'd realize they needed to get in front of it.
Yeah.
But they haven't. So we'll see. I don't think that's a good place for that to go.
So
that location.
I assume if your station, if not Action News, covered Safe Space looking for intake center like through the year, because it wasn't like they were just sitting, forgot about it, doing other things. You know, they do have a lot of other work at different times of the season, but they were looking for a place. I was helping them to the extent I could find a place. This place came in. They reached out to the contacts which we had established for them when Councilmember Sean Morgan and I, after that emergency meeting, were sent to kind of try to mediate things between staff and Safe Space. So we thought we had really had a thaw, and we're going to have better relations from now on. And Safe Space did reach out to their contacts that we had established. And then it came when it finally got to the planner's desk, and they come back and they say, this is a deal, this is what it requires. Safe Space operated for over 10 years without this ever happening. All of a sudden we have a council who's not as friendly towards homeless service providers, and we have a city manager that we have, and now all of a sudden it's a $14,000.
No, we're listening to our citizens who say we had the Boys and Girls Club across the street, right? Across from this intake center. That's inappropriate. I mean, to have those people, some of whom are, you know, sex offenders, with a bunch of kids.
Well, I got to say, and be realistic, all right? They set up at a church, and the city said that because a church traditionally does a lot of things, they're okay there. So the alternative to them going to this place on Esplanade, that they have an indoor place, they could be back at the parking lot right here in the same place that you're saying is a bad idea. So what are we going to do?
Not if I'm on the council, they won't.
Well, yeah, I mean, you would have to change the code to ban churches from providing services.
We
to
can
people.
do that.
Well, and as far as reaching out to constituents, I've never received more emails than when the city was shutting down Safe Space last year. We had almost 100 people show up to a meeting, and every single person spoke critical of the city.
We hang out with different people.
Yeah, well, I mean, there you go. But the turnout does show. I think people in the community do support Safe Space, and I think the city should respond by.
Well, I
also
think
supporting Safe
the
Space.
community does support Safe Space as long as they're not operating next to their house or their business.
Yeah, well,
and that's the rub.
And the Jesus Center and the Tourist Shelter, these are massive construction projects they did. Safe Space is operating a temporary intake center where they transport people to a shelter.
Still have to get a use permit, and you have to have a neighborhood meeting.
According to the city manager under this council.
No, according to the planning director, who is the expert in this, that under the city code, current city code, they need to get a use permit. Now, I happen to agree that $14,000 is a lot of money for that kind of use. So, you're on the city council, right? We should get the code changed to make it not so onerous, right? But right now, those are the rules, and it isn't the city manager's discretion to just waive them because it's a good cause, or the planning director. I don't think Addison and I actually have that different a vision of where we want to be. What we disagree on is how we get there, right? But, if you look at the city's mission statement, it's a safe place to raise a family, a good place to do business, and a quality something, I forget exactly. But it's all about quality of life. It's all about quality of civic life, right? So you can go downtown and enjoy our interesting downtown and not have to worry about vagrants and cars rushing up and down Main and Broadway. And you can go use the park. Your 12-year-old daughter can go ride her bike in the park. You don't worry about her being accosted by some lunatic. That's my vision for the city, and I think we're headed in that direction.
Yeah, in a shorter bit, I agree with all that. I think the way that I would phrase it is in the future, 5 years further down the line, is that young people who grow up here and people come to go to school here are going to want to stay here because they're going to find that the civic life is fulfilling, that we have beautiful places, we have beautiful neighborhoods, and it's an affordable place to be. And there's some of the neighborhoods that exist that already are good places to be, but have been so neglected in these core areas, and we're going to revitalize them, and we're going to make sure that that these are beautiful places that people would intentionally come to, not just the places where the poorest people in our city are warehoused by the railroad tracks, but they're going to be like enlivened. We're going to have more plant life and trees throughout the city, and it's going to be a lot less automobile focused than we have become. And in doing so, having the right kind of development to support that, we're going to have more tax revenue to be able to maintain the public services at elevated levels. We're going to be able to get the fire station that we need. We're going to be able to maintain our police force fully staffed, and we're going to be able to fund beautification efforts.
But you don't want to defund the police?
No.
That
was never a goal of mine.
No, you've
that was
publicly,
actually,
you
wouldn't believe
publicly
this.
got in front
This
of
was
the city
actually
council.
Republican propaganda.
Well, I think I really enjoy my friend Addison, and you can tell that we have different perspectives on things. But I think the key, we have too much rock throwing politically in this country, and in our town, right? And so it just happens that we have good chemistry, and that we can sit down and we can disagree, and still go get a beer afterwards. Just like Reagan and Tip O'Neill, back in the 80s. And although we're not exactly at that level, but what I'm hoping is that people will say, these guys are philosophically pretty far apart, but they can interact in a civil way, and that creates an example for other people that maybe leads us in a different direction in terms of our political environment.
Yeah. I concur, and I would add to that not only do we get along, and not only are we pragmatic when the cameras are off and talk with each other, but I really want to give Tom credit for coming out and being on camera with it. And I think I hope that other people who are supporters of mine, who think that Tom is wrong about everything, could give Tom credit for showing up and speaking on things, because not everybody in public office does that, and some people calculate that it's better for them not to, rather just play under the radar, especially if you got a bunch of money to put out slanderous ads and stuff. But Tom comes out, puts himself out there, And this is, I think, admirable for a public official, and is what we should expect of the people who are elected officials in Chico.